Item. There's a letter that came in. I'm going to ask Teresa to pass this letter around. If any of you would like to read the resolution to include this letter in the agenda, I'll get one of you to read the resolution, and we will include it as a late item in the communication section. So as the letter comes around, if I've got one.
Oh, okay.
You just have a quick look at the top thing. So this late item is a letter from Heidi Bowen, Bowen Enterprises. So if you would like to add this to the agenda, I will get someone to make the motions. That's on the small paper on the top. Councillor Cross.
The resolution is that the letter from Heidi Bowen, Bowen Enterprises Canada Corp., and attached consultants report prepared by Applin and Martin Consultants Limited, received by the City on June 14th, 2019, be accepted on the June 18th, 2019 Council agenda as a late item pursuant to Article 4.8 of the Council Procedures Bylaw number 2135. And that the late item be added to the communications section.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Charlotte. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. So now we're going to adopt the agenda as amended because we're adding this. So if someone want to make that motion, we're adopting the amended agenda. Councillor Charlotte, is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Elliott. Any discussion on that motion and the adoption of the agenda? All those in favor? So the agenda is adopted as amended. So I want to move on to adoption of the minutes for the regular council meeting of May 28, 2019. Is there someone that want to put that motion on the floor? Councillor Cross, is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Charlotte. Any discussion on that motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Any business arising from the minutes of May 28, 2019? Seeing none, I'm just going to move on to announcements from the mayor. So I have a few announcements that I would like to publicly state. First of all, most of you have heard this week we've had 2 resignations from our staff, so I would like to read the resignations. So first off, our CAO, Mr. Alan Chabot, has resigned from the City of Revelstoke in order to pursue other opportunities. The city is grateful for his service and dedication to our community, especially in advancing administration projects that allow council and staff to move the community forward in an efficient manner. The city sincerely wishes him well in his future endeavors. And secondly, Mr. Mike Thomas has resigned from the City of Revelstoke in order to pursue other opportunities. The city thanks Mr. Thomas for his years of service and contributions to the community infrastructure projects and the advancement of asset management, and sincerely wishes him well in his future endeavors. So while we're talking about that, as you can see, there's been a little change at the table at the front. I have Mrs. LaRose here off to my left, who will be sitting in this position as her position, Manager of Legislative Services, and I have Mrs. Lowe to my right, interim CAO and Corporate Officer. So that will stay as we move forward. We will be pursuing some RFPs for those 2 positions, Director of Engineering and CAO. So I also want to state that last week we had the collective impact meeting, and I really feel that it was beneficial to the community, especially moving forward regarding many social issues in the community. And I want to congratulate Councillor Charlotte, who was instrumental along with other people in our community in putting this forward. So thanks for what you've done, and thanks for all of our staff that attended. I appreciate that. That made quite a difference to all the people around the table. We had 80 people participate, and I just think it was a great thing in moving the community forward. In our planning department, Ms. Wade's telling me that many building plans in the community are in process of being plan checked this week, and this will help scheduling for the contract building inspector for his return later this month. So I thank you for that. And I just need to plug our 120th Gala. It should be on Sunday, June 30th at the Community Center. If you haven't picked up your ticket for this yet, I encourage you to run down to the Community Center and get on it, or give them a call. They're more than willing to help you out. So 120 years of incorporation for the city. It's going to be a great party. Just encourage everybody to come out and enjoy. So we're going to carry on with our stuff. So we have a presentation, climate action. Ms. Page-Brittin, Penny, you're here. If you like to take the podium, thank you.
So I'd like to thank you for having me. I'm often watching you from afar here on the council and texting Cindy and saying, I can't hear, but that's all been fixed. So it's nice to be actually part of the council meeting. My name's Penny Page-Brittin. I'm the city's environmental sustainability coordinator. I'm a contract position, part-time, and I've been in this role for 9 years. So I've seen a lot of planning processes, a lot of change, a lot of things that have great projects that have the cities undertaken over the years. I'm here to just present a little bit about climate action and answer any questions that you have. There we go. So I'll start by this slide stating there was a special report that came out last year from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, indicating that we're beginning to experience the impacts of climate change, and it will take rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented change in all aspects of society to keep global warming below the crucial threshold of 1.5 degrees C. I think we know as we watch the news, we look at some of the large climate events, forest fires, things around the world that are happening as a side effect or as a part of the impacts of climate change. And here locally, we've had two recently climate strikes, I guess we were calling them, or walkouts at City Hall from some of the students raising awareness of climate change. Just talking a little, I'm going to go over a little bit about what's happening in the province of BC, sort of a high-level policies, plans that have been put in place that provide tools for local governments. So I'm going to first go over what's happening in the province, then talk a little bit about the tools as a result of what the province is doing, and then what's actually happening or has happened in Revelstoke and what could happen going forward. So in 2018, the Clean BC plan came into play, and this set a path to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2030 based on 2007 levels. This is a very ambitious goal. The 2018 plan put in place a number of actions that were going to bring the province to 75% of that target, with the idea that there'll be new technologies and further actions that'll come out in the future. The initial plan that BC put in place was in 2007, which was the BC Climate Action Plan, which had a lot of initiatives that were really important and special for BC. That plan put in place the carbon tax, which was, BC was the first province to have a carbon tax. In 2009, it put in place the renewable low-carbon fuel requirement, so that when we are fueling up our vehicles, there is a requirement for renewable fuel in both gas and diesel. The 2010 was the Clean Energy Act, where all public sector organizations were required to be carbon neutral, and also put in place requirements for renewable sources for electricity generation. And then in 2011, the Clean Energy Vehicle Program, which provides incentives to purchase electric vehicles. So, I didn't mention in the Climate Action Plan and the recent BC Clean Energy Plan, the tools for local governments. These are some of the tools that we have. The Climate Action Charter came into play in 2008. The city is a signatory to the Climate Action Charter, and it commits local governments to taking action on climate change. And I will talk a little bit more about that shortly. The Local Government's Green Community Statute Amendment Act of 2008, that requires that greenhouse gas reduction targets are put in official community plans. So the city, back in 2010, undertook a pretty comprehensive community energy and planning process, and that helped the city to put the greenhouse gas emission target into the OCP. Now going forward, we're going to need to update that target and with updates to the OCP. In the more recent BC Clean Energy Plan, the BC Energy Step Code was put into place, and I think you've talked a little bit about that. What the Energy Step Code, in the initial climate action plan, there were energy efficiency requirements for buildings, and the Energy Step Code goes a step further to help municipalities move towards net zero energy ready buildings. The province has a target of buildings being net zero ready by 2030, and in the Step Code it allows municipalities to voluntarily go beyond the building code and require increased energy efficiency. And the city this year had a BC Step Code workshop for builders. I was able to find some funding through the Community Energy Association and put Marianne in touch with the Community Energy Association to put that in place. So that's good stuff going forward. Talking about climate action in the city of Revelstoke, we can go back to 2005 with the Revelstoke Community Energy Corporation. I think we often forget about RCEC, or often people just don't know that it's there, or don't think about it. I do, because I calculate the energy emission factor for it every year and look at what they're doing and how much fuel was, how much propane was used, and how much biomass was used, and what it all meant for greenhouse gas emissions. So in 2005, this was as a result of the beehive burner being closed down, extra biomass and what to do with it. It made Revelstoke the first city in BC, first community in BC to have a district energy biomass plant. There's many of them now. And RCEC provides heating to 8 buildings in the community, 3 of them municipal buildings, City Hall, the arena, and the pool. And if you were to look at the energy that is produced by RCEC, and if it was to just be propane with no biomass, it would result in 400 tons of CO2 emissions a year. So there's quite a savings with RCEC. The city is a member of the Federation for Canadian Municipalities Partners for Climate Protection Program. See, I missed the program there, but and this is a part of NICLE, which is Local Governments for Sustainability, which is a worldwide organization. This is the Canadian chapter of that, and I can explain more about that if you would like at some point. And Revelstoke's a signatory to the BC Climate Action Charter as well. And the city hired an environmental sustainability coordinator, and I think that's important that, many little municipalities do not have somebody that's working on the Climate Action Charter or calculating and monitoring greenhouse gas emissions and looking after sustainability issues. So the Climate Action Charter, and I think at the last council meeting you had the care of report. The Climate Action Charter commits local governments to measure greenhouse gas emissions, take reducing actions, and report on corporate GHG emissions. I've been gathering this data for 9 years now. I've got 10 years of data, and we've been looking at it. It's great when I love looking at this data actually, and you look at it and you follow the trends and you think, why is this happening? What can we do differently? And I go over this every year with Troy and Adam, and we figure out what's going on and look at there's ways that we can save energy and save money in operations and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. An example of that actually is the courthouse, which has an electric boiler and a propane boiler. And if you're running the propane boiler, you're actually creating a lot more emissions than running the electric boiler. And we've recently done a building energy audit that shows that financially you are much better off saving in operations by running the electric boiler than the propane boiler. So that was kind of good news on both the costing and greenhouse gas emission front. So that was good. So the city has achieved a level 3 in the under the Climate Action Charter, which is accelerated process on charter commitments. And as part of the reporting for the Climate Action Charter is the CARE reporting. And as I said, that came to council last council meeting, I believe. The city receives a CARE grant every year, and that's based on the amount of carbon tax the city pays directly in corporate operations. The city receives that back by reporting annually on actions at the municipal level. So the CARE report is a report that looks at that current year, what has happened in planning, green space, buildings and electricity, water, wastewater, solid waste, and makes plans for the next year on actions to reduce energy or emissions, or just more sustainable initiatives in each of those categories. Some actions that have happened over the last little while are building energy audits have been completed on pretty much every municipal building now. It allows us to then look at the actions that are recommended. There's a business case, how much financially we will save, what are the greenhouse gas emission and energy impacts, and then those actions are put into capital planning for the buildings. The LED streetlight conversions that you've seen around there's a few of them on Victoria, not a greenhouse gas emission saver because they're electric, but definitely are saving energy, and we're seeing a reduction in cost there and a reduction in energy with the LED lights. The city's fleet, over the last couple of years, we've had a new maintenance software program, which is allowing us to track per unit better, looking at from year to year on the operation, on the maintenance and labor costs on maintenance of the vehicles. And our average age of vehicles in the fleet has gone down significantly in the last few years, which allows for more energy efficient and vehicles that have less maintenance requirements. Accelerated kootenays, I put that there because that's not a corporate initiative. Well, it is a corporate initiative, but it's more of a community thing, just to make sure that everybody's aware of it. This is the electric vehicle charging station that's at the First Street parking lot. That's been in place for almost 2 years now. That was part of an initiative through Accelerated Kootenays and the Columbia Basin Trust. And then the Greening City Reserve Fund. The city has a reserve fund that was put in place 2012 was the initial fund. It's been renamed since. And that's a fund that the money that the city would pay to be carbon neutral, to buy carbon offsets, is put in that reserve fund, and it allows for money to use in initiatives in the city. So we've got that as well. A snapshot of the data that I've been collecting. So this is the total corporate greenhouse gas emission inventory. This includes water and wastewater, street lights, the buildings, and the city's fleet and contracted out services that fit the mold of traditional services under the Climate Action Charter. You'll see there's a number of ups and downs related to heating for colder years, more diesel used for snow removal in big snow years. And so you'll see the trend is downwards. You'll see there's a bump in 2015 going up. It's not as obvious on this one, but when we look at buildings, that was the year of the fire at RCEC. So that year we were using complete propane for all of our buildings. RCEC was using backup propane for the plant, so the emissions were up that year. So it's very hard to over the years I've looked at, should I report on this, should I not report on this, because you say we did this and then the next year it's cold and we go up, but I think you can see that there's a trend and there's ups and downs depending on on, again, weather, snow, and RCEC, really. So, but overall, you can see that both the total greenhouse gas emission inventory and the city buildings inventory is going down. That is all I have to present, but I'm hoping to answer any questions you have. And I'd like to, as you probably know, I'm moving out of this position that I've been in for a very long time, and I've really enjoyed working for the city. I've learned a lot, and I think I've had the opportunity to work on some really, really important and valuable projects, some of the asset management projects, the Recycle BC implementation, which is a while ago now, and being fortunate to be involved and work with some really great people. I will miss you guys.
Penny, thank you. We will miss you. We appreciate all that you've done for our community, and I really appreciate the ability to work with you and what you've done. And you've been our go-to lady. Thank you for that.
Thanks.
I know we're going to have emotionally, we're going to have a hard time replacing you. But thank you for what you've done.
Thank you.
I really do appreciate that. I do have a question regarding your presentation. So we're at level 3 as far as our accreditation goes.
That's correct.
What's the highest level? Is it 5 or something?
The next level is level 4, which is the highest level.
Okay.
And what level 4 is being carbon neutral.
Okay.
So if a municipality chooses to be carbon neutral, that means that all of the emissions that are created, so if you look at this year, well, that's just buildings here. Oops. So around 1,000 tons, maybe? So that would mean that we would purchase carbon offsets for the 1,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions that we've created. And so what that means is the money would go to projects that are happening elsewhere to fund carbon reducing projects. So initially when the Climate Action Charter came out, the goal was that every municipality committed to being carbon neutral in operations by 2012. And then 2012 came along and municipalities were saying, hey, we don't want to do this. We don't want to pay and send money out of our community. We want to keep the money. And so at that time, I did a little report to council saying, here's your options. You can send the money and be carbon neutral. You can do nothing and just say, hey, we're going to make progress. Or you could start a Climate Action Reserve Fund, or now called the Greening Fund. And the money that would go to another project can stay in Revelstoke and support a project in Revelstoke. We're not carbon neutral, but that money is earmarked in that reserve fund for actions that will reduce emissions locally.
Councilors, Councilor Ryan.
Yeah, thanks so much for all of that amazing work you've done. I have questions about what sort of next steps and maybe radical changes could happen. Like if money was no object, what kind of things would you dream about for Revelstoke?
Well, it's tricky because, transportation's tricky, first of all. We are in the middle of nowhere here, kind of. We do need to get out. We do need to have a reliable vehicles. So as the electric vehicles have longer ranges, you're talking the city itself, you're not talking...
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, when you look at the city's footprint, vehicles are one. We need the vehicles we have to remove snow and do the work we do. And so over time, I think there'll be advances. So I think it'll be important to take advantage of some of the more low carbon options for vehicles. In buildings, we just have to keep moving towards more energy efficient or more clean energy buildings. It would be great to have more buildings hooked up to RCEC with a smaller footprint. And solid waste, one of our, we are the greenhouse gas, methane produced from organic waste is 25 times greater greenhouse gas, global warming greenhouse gas potential than CO2. So, you know, in the future, we'll see less emissions at the landfill, I think. It's tricky. I mean, it's hard. I think it's hard to take action on these things because they're difficult. But as the province puts in place more requirements and is helpful with funding, I think some of the steps towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions are easier to do. Thanks.
Councillor Lynch?
If you look at the chart there, if you eliminated from 2009 to 2011, if you took the average, it's pretty constant. Did we make the changes in 2012 and then it just sort of plateaued all the way along there? There's 15, 16, there's one up, one down.
Well, 15 was the year of RC ceasefire. And I think we've had some pretty cool years in 2017 and 18. Now, the snow removal is a little funny because I calculate it based on the contracted out services, so it actually spans a year, so it's not exact. I can't remember how the snow was. I think it's not been great this year. It's not been a high year this year. But I know that we used a lot of propane at the courthouse instead of electricity, which, I mean, these things have, you know, do impact the inventory.
It's just that we have certain buildings that we have are at a standard unless we're retrofitting them pretty extensively. We're not going to make big gains in this area, so we have to find other areas to make improvements. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a challenging thing, but that's absolutely the case.
Councillor Cross and Councillor Lynch.
Yes, thank you, Worship. Penny, thanks for all your work. And, you know, a couple of things. First of all, before you, I don't know what your timeline is for, actually, I've seen the date somewhere in the report, but I'd encourage you to really challenge us. I think what Councillor Rind and what everybody at this table wants to know is if we really wanted to start making a difference, what would that look like? Maybe we can't do it, but let's hear what the list is from someone who's been working with it. Personally, I've never been fond of the concept of buying our way out of our carbon behaviors. And the real answer is to change our behaviors and our process and get with the program, right? So I'd like to hear you have to think about that before you leave your office, or pass the torch, I should say. But here's my other question. What do you think the estimated load is, if any, on developers and builders to adopt the STEP code? Like if we decided as a council to make the STEP code the way we did it here in Revelstoke, how big a hit is that on building costs or building?
I can't answer that. I've done a very little. I started with Marianne looking at possibilities of incentivizing moving into the STEP code and what it might look like for a policy on the Greening Municipal Fund, the Greening Reserve Fund, how we could, you know, what the policy could look like where some of that money could potentially be used and you know, taken from the corporate actions and be used for incentives. That is something that is happening in other communities to incentivize energy advisors.
Or maybe it could be part of the DCC.
Ms. Wade will weigh in a minute.
Yeah. So I have not analyzed carefully what that would look like for Revelstoke.
Ms. Wade?
Yeah, thank you. Well, one of the things working with Penny is we started with the STEP code workshop, which the builders and developers attended, which was very well attended. That was sort of the kickoff to how we're going to go about doing the building bylaw amendment, which will be coming before you shortly. And in that building bylaw, it will address STEP code because it is a requirement that we have to deal with. Because currently there's different ways that historically it's been more of a prescriptive way of doing building codes, where there's been cables, etc. And Section 9.36 of the building code outlines those. But then what's happening with the STEP code is it's moved towards performance-based and a different form of measurement by using energy advisors and modeling that building, which is something we need to incorporate into our building permit process, which to Penny's point about the incentivizing having an energy advisor available so that we can actually do that checklist and get those efficiencies. That is really part of the building envelope itself. So that is really just a cost of doing business within the building process. And then right now, I can tell you that from the past when we had a building services manager, he was quite impressed with the builders here that were building to at least a step code 2 level. So we have it there already in the community. It's about actually formalizing it and then moving it forward in the process. And it's not only the building, it's also site planning. So site planning is another big piece that we have to address in the revision of our OCP and our zoning bylaw, which we will look at as well. So those are the other components, because we have to separate ourselves from the corporate aspect of climate change and action plan to what we have to do as a community and encouraging the community as a whole in that process.
Councilman.
How much is in the reserve fund, the Green City Bylaw? It was renamed, right?
Sorry, I can't.
No, that's okay. No, that's okay. Yeah. But those also, we also put gas tax funds in there, right?
No.
We don't? Okay, that's cool. Can we use that money, or do you think it would be a good use of money to help build trails and things that connect the city better, to encourage bicycling and walking and that kind of thing? Or do you think we're already pretty good?
I think we're pretty good, but there are funding initiatives that are out there for trails. I think, I've written quite a few funding applications, and I quite enjoy them actually. And I think you want to make sure you're taking advantage of those before you use the gas tax money. If there's additional funding opportunities out there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point.
I don't know. I don't know if if there were more trails, would it reduce greenhouse gas emissions? I think it's more of a recreational.
Right. I guess I'm more just thinking about how to connect the city better in some parts that aren't as easy to get to and from. But
no, that's a good point. I think it would depend where you were looking. If it would be would you reduce make commuting easier, traveling easier.
And do those greenhouse gas emission figures that you show include commercial businesses, like how many skiers or
So
something?
all we're looking at here is the city operations. Those are private operations. They're not community emissions.
Right, okay. Because I guess there's no way you could really...
Community emissions are gathered by the province, and it's called the CEI, the Community Energy Emission Inventory. And if you go to the provincial site, it shows data for all of the communities in BC that's done by the province. It's a little tricky because when you look at, it's good for electricity data and propane data or fuel data for residential or commercial buildings. But when you start looking at transportation or solid waste, it's tricky because the transportation data was based on, initially when they started in 2009, it was based on the number of, like ICBC, the number of people in that town, their vehicles, and then a kind of giving it a ballpark sort of what they travel, and then that was your figure. So when you look at it from year to year, it was supposed to be done every 2 years. I think it was done 2007, 10, 12 are on the website. And it's really hard because I thought, how can you compare these and get any understanding? And they actually, this year, stopped including anything but the Lower Mainland because the data is just not that good. There was some talk of, how do you capture greenhouse gas emissions for transportation? Could you go to the gas stations? But I mean, what would that do for us, right, on the highway? I mean, that wouldn't give us an indication of Revelstoke's emissions. And then looking at the solid waste emissions, if you go and look at that, I mean, we're calculating methane from organics that's been in the landfill for a long time. So we're seeing the green waste from many, many years ago. I mean, we need to, you need to stop putting the waste in to stop the emissions, but you're not going to see it for a while. And then there's methane capturing and stuff that goes on as well. But so the data was collected, is being collected and presented, but it's really hard to get a sense of where a community is going from year to year looking at that data. And they've left out large industry as well.
Yeah.
They didn't have to include large industry for confidential reasons. So,
Councilor?
How effective do you think the Russell Energy Corporation is in its biomass burning to provide energy? I know it was a major undertaking for infrastructure to heat to connect the city hall, connect the pool, connect the courthouse with the amenities that were necessary. It was a major expense.
I don't know. I know that the buildings work well, and I know that it's a savings in emissions, and presumably it's a good use of biomass instead of trucking it out of here.
Do you not sit on the RCDC board?
No.
I'll have to change that.
I know it's the combination is. I've heard it's very much more expensive to do it through the biomass burning. It's just had you come up with the cost to implement this program, it wouldn't be worthwhile. And I just wonder if it's maybe time to investigate.
I don't know enough about it. I think there was I believe that there was a large FCM grant at the time to help implement it. I know that there are quite a few programs, again, where federal government and the provincial government are trying to help because, we need to do these things, and they're trying to help make it more viable. But I don't have a handle on
So, Councillor, at the time RCEC came into being, it was a proper thing to do, and connecting up our city resources and parks building and that sort of thing is advantageous to everybody because the rates were lower than what we were paying at the time for propane. So it was advantageous. So we're seeing things shift a little bit, but by the same token, it's still a viable business and good for the community. Any other, Councillor Ryan?
I was just wondering, is there any way for the city to have some kind of bylaws that hold people in businesses responsible to a degree? Obviously not to no large extent, but have some communities explored those kinds of options? I guess it's really hard to monitor.
In regards to what?
responsible for.
Just for holding them responsible to their environmental impact and how they go about doing their business. I guess maybe, I'm realizing it's a difficult thing to measure, but maybe in terms of waste, the amounts that they're bringing stuff down, I don't know.
I think it's subjective to each business too. I mean, it depends on the type of business.
Yeah, then you're basically discriminating against the
Some businesses have very little waste in their day-to-day operations, and others have more. And it depends on the type of business, and then it depends on the onus is on the community as to how we deal with the waste. And so if we can do more efficient ways of dealing with the waste, and that goes to the CSRD and their plans. So they're working on trying to be more efficient with how we do things. So that will basically snowball into the community where we're all being more efficient as we move forward. And now with new furnaces and new appliances that are becoming more efficient, and you look at that and say, if people are replacing those devices as we move forward, then they become more energy efficient.
I guess that vote is kind of the way to get that.
Yeah. Councillor Elliott?
What's your take on the organic waste proposal that's coming from the CSRD?
Just before, just a comment on what you just mentioned about bylaws. I mean, we did in 2016. We put a bylaw for garbage, for salt, for refuge that allowed only one garbage can, and I don't think it was a problem. Like, people recycled more, or it wasn't a problem.
Yeah, no, Your Worship, I think the guys on the ground, so the operators who are collecting are finding that it's 90% compliant, and a lot of people are not finding it a difference. There's plenty of ways to deflect, and I think that's good through Materials BC, and then our recycling industrial park, and the guys have found it. Our tipping fees have definitely gone down as well.
So, I mean, there's an example, I guess, of a bylaw that, you know, you were requiring people to think a little more. We weren't going to take any more garbage than one can based on the fact that there was now a recycling program in place, and recycling went up and garbage went down as a result of a bylaw.
It'd be interesting to see if other communities have tried like other similar types of bylaws and how they work.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
If you have some ideas, we're open to discussing them. We won't do it today, but we'll discuss them this way.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. If I can just expand on that, there is other municipalities that have done these bylaws, and it comes to separating different types of garbage, you know, utilizing community services for the use of building materials and appliances, and Habitat for Humanity. They actually do have people that will go and investigate your garbage, and you will get fined for it. So there's lots of models out there. It's an operational cost, so that's the trade-off. There is lots of examples out there about policies on that that can be used to
Any further questions?
Councillor Elliott.
Well, just on the organic waste facility that's being proposed, it's waste. What's your take? Is it going to help our greenhouse gas emissions or methane reduction? What's it going to do?
So the solid waste management plan, which is mandated by the provinces, is done by the regional district involving all the member municipalities. And in that plan, it recommends removing organic waste from the landfill to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and also to extend the lives of the landfill. And so that initiative that the CSRD is undertaking is part of the solid waste management plan that was approved by the ministry, and it will allow for organics to be processed in Revelstoke, which has not been, you know, there's been some small scale, but not a facility that was large enough that could handle municipal organic waste. So as we move forward, and again, also there's funding available because the province and the federal government are encouraging organic waste diversion. So the CSRD is working on funding applications and working on processes to put that facility in place. And you know, we looked at this a few years ago, and the answer was, if we wanted to divert organic waste, it was to ship it to Spa Hills on the other side of Salmon Arm. And it just was really hard to grasp the idea of trucking our organic waste to reduce greenhouse gas emissions over Three Valley Gap to the other side of Salmon Arm. And so, you know, financially, it was kind of like this because the cost of putting the facility in was so great, but it just didn't make sense. So you know, it's taken a while to get to this point, and that's an initiative that's part of the solid waste management plan. And we'll put that in place.
The science behind it, though, does it reduce greenhouse gas? It's the same material.
It does. So what? So organic matter in the landfill that's buried is not going to aerobically degrade. It's going to anaerobically degrade, and when it's anaerobically degrading, it's creating methane. And so the methane is a 25 times greater global warming potential than CO2. So it's a 25 times greater greenhouse gas impact. So the idea of removing organic waste and doing it aerobically, processing it, you're not creating the methane. And so that's where the savings in the greenhouse gas emissions come.
So as we go further on in our package, there is a request from the CSRD, but I just want to talk just a little bit about that before we get in to what Penny has mentioned. Here, they're going to build a facility. In Salmon Arm, they're collecting, goes to their waste facility, and then it gets picked up and trucked to Spa Hills. So It's a whole different process. We're ahead of the game, and we should be appreciative of what they do. Penny, thank you for your time, and appreciate everything you've done.
Thanks.
Councilor Cross.
Just before we move on, I'd just like to ask Ms. McCabe if you could send council an email on the two, just to give us an update on the CARA grant dollars, how much that is, and also what the position of our reserve fund is. I'd just like to know.
So at the last council meeting, we did have the grant come forward. Penny, do you recall the exact amount?
It's 22,000 this year, and it varies not by much, but around that each year.
Yeah, okay, great.
Just
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, we're going to move on. 9A, bylaws. Does someone want to put that motion on? Councilor Cross.
Yes, that animal control amendment bylaw number 2247 be adopted.
Is there a second for that motion? Councilor Rind. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Moving on to 9B. Someone want to put that on the table? Councilor Brooks Hill.
That the third reading of building amendment bylaw number 2248 be rescinded.
Is there a second for that motion? Councilor Shirlett. Any discussion on the motion? There's a reason that this is being rescinded, so we talked about this at the last council meeting. This is dealing with our going forward with engineering, that sort of thing, so it's just in wording. Is that correct, Ms. Wade? Do you want to weigh in a little bit?
Yes, Your Worship, I'll just provide a little bit of clarification. This is just moving forward, but it's the terminology instead of using letters of insurance to certificates. I ran this through our legal counsel. Apparently I was eloquent at one time, but there's been some newer legislation. So this is just to align it with the current legislation. And we're also working with our partners through the professional engineers and architects as well. Certificates are being prepared by legal counsel, and then we'll be implementing those. So everybody's involved.
Okay. Any further discussion on this? Councilor Elliott?
The building inspection requirements, usually there was about 6 or 7 components to that verification process. The engineers usually would sign off on 3. Does this allow for the engineers now to sign for all 6 of the city requirements?
I need to just clarify that. There's specific requirements for letters of insurance under the Building Act in Section 2.27, which specifically say those are the letters of insurance, and it depends on whether they are prescriptive or performance-based within the building code, and then Part 4s also. And so actually I'm going to detail that out as to when those are required. So I'm aligned with the profession as well, and that we're implementing due process in accordance with the Building Act as well as the professional organizations. Okay.
Any other comments or questions? All in favor? Motion's carried. Moving on to number 2. Someone want to make that motion? Councilor Brooks Hill.
That building amendment bylaw number 2248 be read a third time as amended.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Councilor Shirlett. Any further discussion on the motion? So you're understanding now that we've changed it from letters of assurance to certificates, so we are going to be legal in what we do with this bylaw. Okay, seeing no further discussion, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Staff reports. Someone want to make the first one? 11A. Councilor Shirley.
The Big Eddy Water System Annual Report dated June 18, 2019 be received for information.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Councilor Cross. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Next motion, 911B. Councilors? Councilor Cross.
That the report written by the Interim Chief Administrative Officer Don Lowe dated June 6, 2019 regarding the Climate Change Coordinator staff position be received for information.
Is there a second for that motion? Councilor Shirlett. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Moving on. 11C. Someone make a motion? Councilor Sherlett.
That the 2018 annual report be made available for public inspection and be considered by council at the July 9th, 2019 regular council meeting beginning at 3 p.m. in council chambers.
Is there a second for that motion? Councilor Cross. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Moving on to development services. Someone want to make the motion, or you want to do the presentation first? Mr. Sturgeon?
Presentation.
Thank you.
It's mostly hosting.
Yeah, yeah, you're right.
So I'm going to run through a few slides on this development permit application for a hotel and conference center up at the RMR lands. As you'll recall, this was brought forward in January of this year, so just January of 2018, and we worked through a review with the applicant and then brought it to council in January of this year, January 2019. And as you recall, there was a discussion that night, and we left with some resolutions from council asking for completion of a few outstanding conditions, and those included a finalized RAR report, a landscaping plan that included tree protection measures, and SPIA stands for Streamside Protection and Enhancement Area enhancements to be coordinated with that RAR report, engineering details on stormwater management, a noise impact assessment report, a snow shed management report, and since then we've received all of those. I'll go through those changes. They're detailed in your report, and we're recommending that council approve issuance today. So just quickly, I won't go over all the details of the building again. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And you've got hyperlinks to the report from January that has all those details. But we will review the changes in a little more detail. So as you know, the location right across from the existing Sutton Place Hotel, and this parcel right there. This is in the Resort Lands Development Permit area, and the zoning is CD08. The development permit area points to the guidelines that are contained in the zoning. So as you recall from the previous conversation, normally we take our guidelines directly from the OCP. In this case, we take them from the CD08 zone themselves. And just a refresher on development permits. So the development permits in this area are established for protection of the environment, protection of the development from hazardous conditions, and forming character objectives. So the guidelines help us establish how we implement the development permit areas. Our scope of authority as a city is limited to those guidelines themselves, so that's to say we can't deny development permits based on use. And changes can be requested, but these must be within the scope of the guidelines. So once again, this is an 8-story building, mixed use, has a hotel facility, has a conference center, a restaurant, some retail space, lots of parking, and then an overhead pedestrian walkway to the existing Sutton Place. Lots of landscaping surrounding the hotel as well. This is just a brief overview of the landscaping plan. So we've got Camosi Road up here, Port Cochere here, which is intended for guest access, a parkade entrance right here, a ramp leading down to the rear of the hotel where there's a loading facility here. This is a helicopter landing pad area right here that's currently being used as such. You've got the parking lot facilities over here. Down here you've got the Thomas Brook neighborhood with some adjacent houses and some vacant parcels over here. There's a stream running down this side of the property, that's Turtle Creek, and a very small tributary right there. Nothing on this site plan has changed substantially except for the landscaping. I'll go over that a bit. You've seen these before, but these are the exterior elevations. That's from Camosi Road. That is from the rear. And these are the two side profiles. West is, it's kind of weird here, west is in the middle. So this is looking at the proposal from the south looking north. This is from the north looking south. So the existing place would be over here, and adjacent houses would be on this side right here. That's the materials palette for the building. I've got the actual physical one right here if anyone wants to have a look at it. We've got some hardy plank, some wood that'll be used for posts and beams, some cultured stone, 2 types of glazing, and these are the color samples right there. So I'll go through the reports that we received one by one briefly. So this is the resolution the council made in January 22. We did receive that report. It's been sent to the province. The province requested a couple of changes, and it was revised and sent back and accepted by them. The report, in order to complete that report, the applicants had to survey the site to identify the exact SPIA boundary, and then the report includes how that area within the SPIA will be revegetated and enhanced. And that was able to inform the landscaping plan as to what plantings would be, where they would go, and what the drainage requirements would look like. So this was the most necessary of the bunch to inform. It sort of had a cascading effect to inform the other bits of missing information. And then the survey we received identifies the SPIA areas, and those will be fenced prior to construction. The landscaping plan, as I said, was coordinated with the RAR report. I'll show you a diagram on the next page here. We also received, council had made a resolution for arborist recommendations for tree protection and management. The applicant asked us if they would be able to use a BC registered forester, and we agreed to that. That forester's report is included in the schedules of the development permit and identifies protection and mitigation measures for off-site trees. So it's a little difficult to see here, but there was a survey undertaken of all the existing trees along the property boundary, and they identified the root zones of those trees based on the drip line or the trunk width of the tree. And the foresters recommended a few measures that will be undertaken during construction. So as they build the hotel and they add grading to the site, they'll be impacting the root zones. That will require some hand digging, some pulling away of dirt. We're going to be requiring in the development permit conditions a fence along the SPIA boundary, so they're going to be limited as to what disturbance they can do. But that report will help those trees to survive. Now, I've noted in the report that this can't be guaranteed, but in any event, their health will be, the likelihood of their health will be improved based on these recommendations. These are the riparian area plantings that were added to the landscaping plan here, and I've identified the extent of changes there. Stormwater management report was received from the engineer and has been forwarded for review. This is coordinated with the landscaping and with the RAR report. Further details on drainage and stormwater management are dealt at building permit stage and regulated through our subdivision development and servicing bylaw. What we wanted to ensure here was that on-site drainage was taken into account in the positioning of the building and the location of roads relative to the building and the creek. So that has been covered off. We also asked for a noise impact assessment to address concerns surrounding nuisance and noise and the impacts of that on neighboring properties. That noise impact assessment had little to draw upon in terms of standards that we have in our bylaws, and unfortunately there are no national standards, but it was a professional engineer who specializes in acoustics and noise control. They looked at an example from the District of West Vancouver, or pardon me, that was North Vancouver, I think, wasn't it? District of West Vancouver, where they have established a maximum threshold of 45 decibels for continuous noise sources. So that amount has been incorporated into the conditions of the DP, and we're asking for a report following construction of the building confirming that those noise levels are held at that amount. 45 decibels would be the sound of passing traffic or casual conversation, or if you're inside your kitchen, say the volume of your dishwasher. That was an example I put in the report. And I'm not talking about a dishwasher from the 80s, I'm talking about a newer one. Non-continuous noise sources are, of course, trucks, people coming and going from the back where there is a loading facility that's proposed. We've recommended to council that you pass a resolution requiring a restrictive covenant be registered on the property, and that restrictive covenant will limit the use of that loading area to the hours of 8 to 6, 7 days a week. So that is what we call prior to conditions, so the applicant will be responsible for providing us that covenant and registering it before they can get their development permit or building permit. And then that puts the ability on us to be able to enforce that covenant if there's issues surrounding noise outside of those hours. We also received a snow shed and snow storage plan from a professional engineer. They identified the need for additional canopies in these areas to shield pedestrians from snowfall. There's also going to be some signage put up there. They'll have to undertake some operational precautions during winter depending on the snow year. These areas here are also identified for snow storage as it comes down off the roofs. There will be snow stops spec'd on the building. That's included in the development permit, and it'll also be a building code issue, but this is it's inevitable that some snow will come off, and so this will store snow in those areas, and this will prevent it falling right outside the doorways. We've, again, appended this report directly to the development permit, so all of the recommendations in that report become requirements. So just a quick summary of some of the conditions that were put into the permit as a result of all of this. Of course, adherence to the plans themselves, the materials that we covered and the landscaping plans are required. All lighting on the building is downlighting, and we've specified that there's to be no glare onto neighboring properties. So in some cases, there may be a need to install a shield. This is something that we'll have to look at once the building is constructed. No opening windows on the furthest western wall facing the adjacent residences. Speed protection measures need to be incorporated into construction practices as they are written in the raw report itself. The same with the tree protection measures, and the noise mitigation is detailed in that impact assessment, which is also appended to the permit. And again, there I've put that we're requiring an assessment report following construction to ensure that the noise level has been met. During our course of review on this application, we discovered a covenant registered against the title of the property that requires dedication of parkland. This was effectively a deferral from a previous subdivision. Parkland has never been envisioned in this location. It's too small, it's too steep, and it's an unsuitable spot. That covenant's registered against 2 other parcels north of this site, totaling 82 acres. So we'll have opportunity in a future development application to secure that parkland, and that would be incorporated in with some broader master planning of the resort area, and we would use the resort master plan as a guide on that as well. That covenant itself restricts building permit issuance and any land alterations, so we require discharge to proceed to construction. And so one of our recommendations is that council authorize us to discharge that covenant, and as well that council approve the development permit for issuance with the following conditions: registration of the loading in the rears, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. 7 days a week, and receipt of the landscaping security in the amount of $120,000 and change. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Sturgeon. Any questions for Mr. Sturgeon before we put the motion on the table? Councilor Burchell.
Just with the parkland, so if council discharges the requirement, that doesn't mean that it doesn't still exist for the future.
It's registered against 3 parcels right now, so we're discharging it from this one parcel. It remains on the other 2, and any proposal to develop on those lands would be subject to the terms of that.
But we're relinquishing the right or the requirement for the whatever 1.27 acres of parkland for this particular parcel. Correct.
If I just explain, so if that 1.27 could come off any of those 3 parcels of land, so we're not relinquishing the right, it's going to be attached to the other 2.
That's what I thought.
Any further discussion? Councilor Cross and Councilor Elliott.
Yes, Your Worship, thank you. Mr. Sturgeon, so in terms of the DP and protection of the environment, could you go back to the exterior elevation slide that you had up?
Which one?
It was only one of the exterior back elevation. Yeah, right. So on my right side, at the back there, where the slope will be quite steep, I just have concerns about water runoff and impact on those trees and that environment. Do you think? I mean, I know there's conflicting information out there. There's some different engineering reports, and I'm just wondering if we're really 100% sure about the management of the water and the impact on the environment there.
I'm not an expert in this field, so that's why we've required reports from professionals to give us more confidence. So as it stands right now, it's a naturalized area that is sloped. This material here will be absorbed. It will absorb water. So there will be runoff, but it won't. It's not an increased amount of runoff. If anything, it will be a decreased amount of runoff. All of these areas, from basically where my shaky cursor is,
right,
are diverted to other outlets. So there's a portion of the site that's diverted to the creek. That's the roadway and the area coming down that ramp. That goes into a collection, then it goes through some filtration, as I understand it, and then it's discharged to the creek with a flow regulator. That goes also as well for portions of the exposed parquet at the top of the building, and then the eastern part of the building itself drains into downspouts, and that goes into the stormwater system on Camosi.
So two aspects to that, if I can follow up. One is the turbidity discharge into the creek, so I'm assuming the filtration will make sure that we're not putting a lot of turbid water into the creek. Turbid being granular material in the water, or that may change the sediment flow of the creek, or impair any wildlife use of that creek that happens to be happening.
So as I understand it, okay, so this is more of an engineering issue, but as I understand it, the water is filtered, and then the discharge rate is regulated to slow it down.
So the water is fully filtered before it gets to the creek.
Correct. And that follows the recommendations of the riparian area assessment report.
And then the second part of that is, with this material on that slope that's going to, what was your word, move water? Absorb. How does that material get there when the existing slope is there and we got to protect those trees? So how does that happen?
So there's material being added.
Okay.
The material will be added on top of the root zones of the trees. What the forester has done has said that if you, the material itself has to bear the weight of that access road that's up there.
Correct. Right. I understand.
And so they have to remove the surface material from the root zones of the trees. So that's done by hand. And then as I understand it, it's better to cut the roots rather than leave them. So they actually go down and they hand cut the roots, and then replace it with structural fill, and then they build up from there.
And they build up from there. And the tree's still there.
The tree remains.
And according to the forester, this works and the tree still lives.
So the forester says that up to 40% of the roots can be cut away, and the likelihood of the tree's survival will remain.
Okay.
That's scientific, but it's not scientific.
Right. And I have one more question. Okay. So in terms of safety, so back to that, we've had discussions about this before with the trucks coming in the back and coming out on Camosi. There doesn't seem to be any other way to do that from a safety perspective. I'm just worried about the truck activity on what is the major road through the resort.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
So if you go to the overhead schematic of the property, so the truck access is on the right.
Correct.
Into the back of the property, right? Thank you, Your Worship. So that just seems like it's going to put a lot of trucks into Camosi Road, which of course is the major thoroughfare. And we're not enlarging that road, right? We're not.
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Right. So I just have concerns about that, and I'm just wondering if that's particular. I'm not sure there's another way to do it. We had the other same concerns with the drive-in for the hotel, and that seemed to work well with it coming in, drive one, basically a one-way, right, to get in for registration and stuff. But you feel confident in planning that this is not going to be an issue?
Well, from a planning point of view, we were happy with the separation of truck traffic with pedestrian traffic.
Okay.
As part of the review, we asked for an idea of what kind of loading trucks they would expect, and then we confirmed that the size of this turnaround would accommodate those loading trucks. So that was based on the information that was provided to us.
So they're able to turn completely around, so they're front out, front in.
So they're front out, yeah, exactly.
Great. And we have the walkway, right, from this hotel across.
Crosswalk over
Which
here.
will stop a lot of the pedestrian traffic from being on the road.
And then this walkway here. So this walkway is not a certainty at this point. We're planning for it, and there's a process that needs to be undertaken as well. We need to go through some airspace easements, a lot of legal agreements. So that's going to be done after this development permit. But there is no pedestrian access over here. There's the entrance to the Sutton Place over here, and so they've incorporated the sidewalk right here, which leads up right here. And if you've been up to the resort this season, you'll see that they've done some improvements here to help pedestrians across. And that was a conversation that we'd had during this application about making sure that this was an improved area.
All right, thank you. Councilor Wade. Just concern on the operating zone timeline, 8 till 6, making more sense from 8 till 5. Is that a practical matter for people having supper?
The 8 to 6 was an offering by the resort operators themselves, and so those were the numbers we used. It didn't seem unreasonable.
Okay. And what about a pathway, a possible connection for people below, just instead of having to walk completely around, maybe just up on the left side of the helicopter pad here? There's an opportunity to create something.
There's an opportunity for certain once we have a better sense of how these lands over here are going to develop.
And one third question on the covenant: does a golf course count as parkland?
Does a golf course count as parkland? No, parkland is land that's vested as park. So it's a subdivision plan is deposited to the city, and the area is noted as park, and then it becomes the property of the crown.
So the two other parcels that are up are not part of the golf course?
We haven't seen the plans for the proposal yet, but.
This way.
Just a point of clarification, under the LGA, when you go through subdivision, 3 lots or more, and there's 3 or 4 different scenarios, and you have to give 5% park. So that parkland dedication wasn't given in the initial phase 1 of the subdivision, so they deferred it by covenant. And so that's traveling with the land now, but it's defined as park, of which the city has to agree that it's park under our terms, it has to be usable space.
Councilor Cross.
Yes, Your Worship. I'd like to suggest that we amend that noise from 8 to 6 to 9 to 5. And since the developer's in the room, I'm wondering if they could comment on whether they're amenable to that amendment.
I guess I look at it, and I'm not going to dispute you on that, except that they've also said 8 to 6. I look at it as an early morning truck coming at 8 a.m. to deliver groceries, that sort of thing, to set the restaurants up for the day. 8 o'clock is probably the preferred time when I see them delivering around town. And then 6 p.m. in the evening might be unlikely that's going to be trash, but it may be delivery of beverages or something like that sort of thing. So unless it's just climate you're concerned about, because you think that should be better suited to the entire neighborhood, I will just basically, Ms. Whitney, do you want to speak to that? Or?
I was just going to say, I can speak to that, and then just
thank you.
Okay, so Mr. Nielsen, are you agreeable to that 9 to 5? Is that what you're saying? Or are you talking about the 8 to 6 that I was bringing up?
Agreeable 9 to 5. Okay. Most of our suppliers come from outside Revelstoke, so they don't get here.
Okay, so 9 to 5 is okay? You're okay with that?
I think that'd be a good amendment.
Okay. So.
Just read it out? Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so we have a couple motions on the table. So I'd like someone to make the first one, please. Someone want to get 66, Councilor Gillette?
The first one?
Yes, please.
DP 2018-01 be approved.
Is there a second for that motion? Councilor Ryan. Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Part number 2. Someone want to put that on the table, please? Councilor Cross?
Sure. That final issuance of DP 2018-01 be subject to the following. A, registration of a Section 219 restrictive covenant with the city as a signatory, restricting the use of the loading area at the rear west of the proposed building to the hours of 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. 7 days a week. And B, receipt of a landscaping security in the amount of $120,073.76.
Is there a second for the motion? Councilor Elliott. Any further discussion on this motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Number 3.
Sure. That staff be authorized to discharge covenant LB 164421 from 2955 Camosi Road, property ID number 027650332.
Is there a second for that motion? Councilor Elliott. Any discussion on that motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sturgeon. Appreciate your time. We're going to move on to correspondence. So we have a letter in our package for support for the CSRD landfill request. Anyone want to make a motion on that to support that request? That's to allow them to get funding for their greening. Councilor Purcell?
I will be happy to make a motion to support the CSRD's request.
Is there a seconder for the motion? Councilor Charlotte. Any further discussion on that motion? Councilor Elliott.
Is there any timeline when they can come in and give us a little presentation on what they're doing overall?
I'm going to see them on Thursday, so I'll ask.
Perfect.
Okay, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Item 12B. The Revelstoke Accommodation Association is asking for a council representative. And so that means that if one of you is interested in being that representative, then you would be sitting with the Revelstoke Accommodation Association as a council liaison and being able to listen to them and hear their input directly, bring that back to council. Is that correct, Ms. Lowe?
And get a free lunch.
And get a free lunch, maybe. So is there one of you that feels comfortable in taking on that role? Councillor Cross, you feel comfortable with that?
Yes, I do, Your Worship.
Is everyone else okay with Councillor Cross taking that on? Okay, so someone make the motion, other than Councillor Cross. Councillor Ryan?
That Councillor Cross be appointed as the council representative to the Revelstoke Accommodation Association.
Is there a seconder for the motion? Councillor Charlotte. Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Now, we have a second change here. Presently, Councillor Brooks Hill is a second on the library board and is willing to step up to be appointed. So does someone want to bring that motion? Councillor Cross.
That Councillor Brooks Hill be appointed as the council representative to the Okanagan Regional Library Board.
Is there a seconder for the motion? Councillor Charlotte. Any discussion on the motion? Councillor Brooks Hill, thank you. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Now, we need a second, an alternate, for that Okanagan Regional Library Board. Is there one of you willing to step up to do that? Councillor Brooks Hill, are you going to do that?
I just want to say, so I believe there's 4 meetings a year, and there's one that I think falls in May, which I probably could not make, so whoever is committing to is the one a year.
Councillor Charlotte?
I can do it.
Okay. So is everybody okay with Councillor Charlotte standing up and being the alternate? Someone make that motion, please.
I'll continue.
Okay, Councillor Cross.
And that Councillor Charlotte be appointed as the alternate council representative to the Okanagan Regional Library Board.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Ryan. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Do we have any press in the room? Okay, so I'm going to move on to in camera pursuant to section 90.1A and E of the community charter. Someone want to make that motion? Councillor Brooks Hill, Councillor Charlotte. We're now going in camera. We'll take a couple minute break. Thank you.